Thank you for watching. I'm Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news sources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Asian, African, and Australian channels, and also by news agencies AFP, AP, and Reuters. Now the headlines. Protests in favor of Palestinians have spread into many other parts of the world. In America, police acting violently against these protesters in colleges campus. Mr. Biden favored the police tough action against the protesters in UCLA. Relative of Israeli hostage. Controversial cases have to be heard by Supreme Court. In Gaza, Israel continue bombing and intend to go into Rafah. Hamas sent an delegation to Egypt for talks on hostage and ceasefire. UN report says it will take 15 years to Palestinians to get back a normal life. US intelligence chief says that Iran has stopped attacking Americans in Middle East. Mr. Trump said if we lose election in November 2024, he will accept it. He will not accept it. EU help migrants in Lebanon. A mountainside highway in southeast China has collapsed. A gasoline truck has crashed in Connecticut highway. On Wall Street, Nasdaq, S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial all went up.
Tens of thousands again take to the streets of Tbilisi to urge Georgian lawmakers to scrap a controversial foreign agents bill. This Thursday, the US, UN and European Union all joined in denouncing what critics have dubbed the Russian law. Hopes of securing a ceasefire in Gaza are steadily rising as Hamas sends a delegation to Cairo. The UN says even if the war were to end today, it would still take until at least 2040 to rebuild what's been destroyed. And with at least 2,000 pro-Palestinian demonstrators arrested in the US at campuses, President Biden calls for the restoration of order. He says while the US doesn't crack down on dissent like an authoritarian regime, he will give no place to anti-Semitism. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Alexander Orcott. Now, after days of huge protests in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, the US, UN and EU have all joined in condemning a bill making its way through Parliament that it's feared would be used to crack down on dissent. Now, the Russian law, as it's been dubbed by critics, would require any organisation receiving a certain amount of funding, around 20% from overseas, to declare themselves as foreign agents. Lauren Berstecker explains.
They spent the past few nights standing outside Parliament, but on Thursday, throngs of protesters spread through Tbilisi, waving European flags and blocking roads as they called for the withdrawal of the foreign influence bill. And despite a recent security crackdown, the protests only seemed to grow in size.
We have been protesting against the Russian law for many days. Our government wants to adopt this law and govern this country like Putin, but we won't allow this. They are beating us every day, poisoning us with gas, but we will not stop.
Critics have compared the draft bill to a similar law in Russia, where it's been used to silence media and non-governmental organizations. Many Georgians also worry it could derail the country's EU membership bid, after Brussels repeatedly expressed concerns over the law's potential for abuse.
There are concerning developments in terms of legislation. The law that is passed on transparency in second reading, as it stands, is unacceptable and will create very serious obstacles for the EU accession path.
The bill, which is supported by the ruling Georgia Dream Party, is likely to be passed in its third reading mid-May, and any veto by the president could be overridden in Parliament. But protesters still have reasons to hope. Last year, a similar law was scrapped after it triggered widespread demonstrations.
Next to the Gaza conflict, where after months of on-off negotiations, efforts to end the devastating war seem to have reached a critical moment, Hamas has sent a delegation to Cairo for the talks to try to reach an agreement with Israel. The United Nations Development Programme earlier issued a report that said that even if the war were to end today, it would still take until 2040 to rebuild the tens of thousands of homes, other buildings and infrastructure that have been destroyed.
Scenes of destruction that are becoming increasingly widespread across Gaza as Israel presses ahead with its military campaign. The UN has estimated that rebuilding the enclave will cost between $30 and $40 billion and could take decades.
72% of all housing in Gaza has been destroyed, and 9% of all other commercial and other buildings have been destroyed. We haven't seen anything like this since 1945, since Second World War. That intensity in such a short time and the massive scale of destruction.
After nearly 7 months of Israeli bombardment in Gaza, the UN says that rebuilding the enclave's homes will take a minimum of 16 years. If the pace of rebuilding is in line with that of several previous conflicts in the enclave, it will take approximately 80 years to reconstruct all of the fully destroyed housing units, according to the UN Development Programme. A separate UN report in collaboration with the Education Cluster indicated that more than 70% of schools in Gaza are in need of major or full reconstruction.
Now, more humanitarian aid is beginning to get into northern Gaza via the long-closed Erez crossing after the Israeli government reopened it under immense pressure from its allies. Israel says around 400 trucks a day are now entering the enclave, but the UN disputes that, saying less than half the required 500 trucks are getting through.
Supplies sent by the World Health Organization have finally reached Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia, northern Gaza, but it's still far from enough.
If diesel doesn't get here in sufficient and continuous quantities and in a timely manner, work in the complex will stop, services will cease, and we will risk losing all the lives dependent on ICU ventilators or incubators and during operations.
Most of the aid that is getting in is coming through Egypt via the crossing points at Rafah and Kerem Shalom, the intersection of Egypt, Gaza and Israel. But under pressure from Washington, Israel has reopened the northern Erez crossing. Humanitarian agencies had been pleading for a way to reach the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians still in the north of the Gaza Strip who are starving.
We decided to open today the Erez crossing in the northern side of Gaza in order to bring water, humanitarian supply, medicine and food.
To help speed up the delivery of aid, the US is constructing a floating port near the Gaza coast to receive shipments coming by sea from Cyprus.
As of today, we are over 50% complete on setting up the pier. The floating pier has been completely constructed and set up. The causeway is in progress.
Though Benjamin Netanyahu's government is making concessions on humanitarian aid, its plan for a long-promised ground operation into the city of Rafah could derail what little progress has been made. Around 1.5 million Palestinians are sheltering there. The UN chief says an invasion of the city would be an unbearable escalation, while humanitarian agencies warn it would cause the main aid distribution hub for Gaza to collapse.
Now, looking at some international reactions, Turkey has stopped all trade with Israel, citing the worsening humanitarian tragedy in the Palestinian territories. The trade ministry saying imports and exports of all goods will now be stopped until the Israeli government allows an uninterrupted and sufficient flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Hitting back, the Israeli foreign minister labelled President Erdogan a dictator who's disregarded the interests of the Turkish people and Turkish businesses. President Joe Biden has addressed the pro-Palestinian protests that have erupted at university campuses nationwide after more than 2,000 arrests were made in recent weeks. He said, while the US does not crack down on dissent like an authoritarian regime, it is also not lawless either, so order must be restored. There's no place for anti-Semitism. For more details, we were joined earlier by our Washington correspondent, Razor Jackson.
For the last week, pro-Palestinian protests have swept university campuses across the United States, from Columbia to UCLA. Over 1,000 people have been arrested, and up until now, Joe Biden has been silent on the issue, and he broke that silence on Thursday.
It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not peaceful protest. It's against the law. Dissent is essential to democracy, but dissent must never lead to disorder or to denying the rights of others so students can finish the semester and their college education.
The president says this isn't a time for politics, but the political optics are impossible to escape. Joe Biden has low approval ratings among young people and Palestinian Americans, a vital voting bloc in places like Michigan, as we now are just 6 months away from November's election.
That's Razor Jackson reporting from Washington, and it's not only in the United States. Pro-Palestinian sit-ins have spread to campuses around the world, including here in Paris, where the prestigious Sciences Po has been the focal point. It's closing down its main site in the French capital due to a fresh occupation of the buildings by students. Along with the occupation, 6 students at least have announced that they're beginning a hunger strike in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. A little earlier, one of the student activists, Bushra Al-Zubi, joined us.
Honestly, we wouldn't have wanted this to get up until here because we didn't want to disrupt the academic life, but this is what the direction wants, and this is the consequences of their silence and complicity. We asked them for things that are very clear and very easy for them to meet, but they didn't. We asked them very simply to take off all the sanctions against the students, pro-Palestinian students, and they didn't. They said they will be triggered if they need. So this is just blackmailing, and we can't take that. So students now are on hunger strike. So things are going a bit harsher just because the administration is not listening to us. They do not care. We do not have any answer to any of our questions or any of our demands. So this is the natural consequences. So for now, they have started since 2 p.m. today. They will continue to do so until our demands are met, specifically the investigation with the partnership of universities who are directly or indirectly complicit of violation of international law.
Now, following the meeting with students, the interim director of Sciences Po, Jean Basser, said he's not willing to give in to all of the students' demands.
I think this town hall allowed students protesting in the amphitheater to understand things they may not have known about certain subjects. But I was firm on certain points. For instance, I refused the creation of a working group suggested by some students to investigate our relations with Israeli universities and companies which are financial partners.
And that's some other world news, and the Brazilian President Lula da Silva has travelled to the southern state of Rio Grande do Sul, where the death toll from devastating flooding has now risen to 29 officially. 60 others are missing. Lula pledged to offer all the support possible that his government can give amid widespread electricity and water cuts. Numerous roads, bridges have been swept away as heavy rains triggered landslides. Part of a hydroelectric dam has also given way, while some 10,000 people have been forced from their homes. Ahead of the Paris Olympic Games, the French President Emmanuel Macron has taken a huge gamble by putting the river that runs through the heart of the capital at the centre of the event. The opening ceremony will be held on the Seine, along with several of the open water events. Despite concerns about whether it will be clean enough or to ensure that it is safe to use, a huge water storage basin has been inaugurated this Thursday.
It's a gigantic structure meant to bring Paris one step closer to its promise of hosting the Olympics free swimming events in the Seine.
The games serve as a pretext, an accelerator, but above all, we do this for the long-term legacy. And on a personal level, I think it's wonderful. This is exactly our vision for these Olympic Games, games that serve a territory, the residents, and the environment too, because there's less pollution in the natural environment.
Last year's test events in the Seine had to be cancelled due to poor water quality. One reason was heavy rains that overwhelmed the city's old sewers, causing them to overflow into Paris's main river. At an estimated cost of €1.4 billion, this reservoir aims to collect stormwater and overflowing sewage and domestic wastewater before directing them to treatment centres.
This structure enables us to move the event back a few days in case there are major climate shocks, but we won't have to cancel them altogether.
For decades, the Seine was mainly used as a waterway for the transport of goods and people, and sometimes as an open-air dump for industries and citizens. Swimming there has mostly been prohibited since 1923, but the threat of a fine or disease won't stop these Parisians. They've already been swimming in the Seine for over a year.
This part of the canal looks relatively clean. We go swimming and we've never really had any health problems. On the other hand, the Seine in central Paris seems a bit dirtier. So it's already swimmable and we're already enjoying it a lot.
The River Seine is also said to be at the heart of the grandiose opening ceremony of the Olympics, although these plans could change for security reasons.
And that's where we end this edition. Stay tuned for more world news on France 24.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the NewsHour tonight, police forcefully break up the UCLA encampment as arrests and protests against the war in Gaza spread to more college campuses.
We hear from the niece of an Israeli-American hostage nearly 8 months after he was taken captive by Hamas.
And a closer look at this consequential Supreme Court term, the cases heard, and the ideological divide on display.
This appears, especially this term, to be a very confident court, willing to step into some of the most divisive issues.
From viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Police in riot gear broke up an encampment at UCLA overnight and arrested protesters after another day of high tensions on campus. That followed earlier violence from counter-protesters.
So far, more than 2,000 people have been arrested in the last 2 weeks. While many protests have been peaceful and many of the arrested are not students, the past week has seen a series of escalating confrontations, occupations, and shutdowns. That led President Joe Biden to condemn violence and disorder today following the latest developments in Los Angeles. Overnight, hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters at UCLA defied warnings to leave their encampment. And just before dawn, police tore down the tents. Over the course of the day, they arrested more than 200 people. The police response was still underway when President Biden spoke at the White House and drew a line between dissent and disorder.
So let me be clear. Peaceful protest in America. Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest.
The president, when asked by a reporter, said the National Guard should not be deployed to respond to the protests. And when asked if the protests have made him reconsider his policies in the region, the president said no. Back in Los Angeles, police faced growing criticism for a delayed response to Tuesday night's assault on the protesters' campsite at UCLA. The city's mayor and California's governor have complained, and students today were still angry.
I think it's especially galling for a lot of protesters because less than 24 hours ago, the protesters in this encampment were attacked by more than 200 unidentified counter-protesters who showed up in the middle of the night and assaulted the encampment for 7 hours. And the police didn't show up for the first 3 or 4. And then when they did, they sat around and they watched for another hour and a half.
There's no riot here. Why are you in riot gear?
Elsewhere, police also broke up a protester encampment at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire last night and arrested 90 people. Today, the school's president defended the action. In a statement, President Sion Bylock said, quote, "Last night, people felt so strongly about their beliefs that they were willing to face disciplinary action and arrest. While there is bravery in that, part of choosing to engage in this way is not just acknowledging, but accepting that actions have consequences." In Oregon, protesters occupying a Portland State University library were cleared out of the building by police. Once outside, protesters dismantled police barricades. But while some protests are intensifying, others are coming to an end. Officials at the University of Minnesota reached a deal with pro-Palestinian demonstrators to disband their encampment today. As part of the agreement, organizations involved in the protest will get to meet with the university's Board of Regents next week to discuss how the school should divest from companies with ties to the Israeli military.
And disagree across lots of differences.
Wesleyan University President Michael S. Roth, thanks for your time and for your insights this evening.
Thank you.
In the day's other headlines, Hamas announced it's sending a delegation back to Egypt, a possible sign of progress in talks on a Gaza ceasefire with Israel. The group said its goal is to work toward an agreement. In the meantime, a UN report said it will take until at least 2040 to rebuild all of the destroyed homes in Gaza. The report estimated that nearly 80,000 housing units have been flattened in the war. U.S. intelligence officials say Iran's allies have paused attacks on American troops, at least for now. Groups linked to Tehran carried out a series of strikes on U.S. forces in the Middle East after the war in Gaza began. But at a Senate hearing today, the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, said the situation has calmed.
Iranian-aligned militia groups in the region continue to plan attacks against our forces, but have broadly paused conducting such attacks, though it is not clear how long that pause will last.
Haines said there's no assessment yet on when militia attacks might resume. Former President Trump has stepped up his threats to reject November's presidential election results if he does not win. On Wednesday, he was asked specifically about Wisconsin. He told the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, quote, "If everything's honest, I'd gladly accept the results. If it's not, you have to fight for the right of the country." The former president made similar statements in 2016 and in 2020. President Biden stopped in Charlotte, North Carolina today to speak with relatives of 4 law enforcement officers killed this week. They were shot while trying to serve a warrant. Today, the president met with the local police chief and others at the Charlotte airport before seeing the families in private. The European Union will send more than $1 billion in aid to Lebanon to curtail the flow of migrants to Cyprus and Italy. Lebanon hosts more than 785,000 Syrian refugees, plus hundreds of thousands of others. In Beirut today, European Union Commission President Ursula von der Leyen appeared with the Lebanese Prime Minister and the President of Cyprus on the aid deal.
We are committed to maintain legal pathways open to Europe and resettle refugees from Lebanon to the European Union. At the same time, we count on your good cooperation to prevent illegal migration and to combat migrant smuggling.
The EU has arranged similar funding deals with Egypt, Tunisia, and Mauritania in a bid to tighten border controls and human smuggling. In southeastern China, the death toll from a collapsed mountainside highway has risen to 48. On Wednesday, state TV showed cranes lifting vehicles crushed after tumbling through the section of road that gave way in Guangdong province. It followed a month of heavy rains. State officials in Maryland announced today that rebuilding the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore will take 4 years and nearly $2 billion. The span collapsed in late March when a container ship rammed into a support column. 6 members of a road crew were killed. On Wednesday, a 5th body was recovered. The 6th worker has not yet been found. Part of Interstate 95 in Connecticut will be closed for days after a gasoline tanker truck crashed today on a bridge over the highway. The wreck shut down the main north-south highway linking New England with New York. Traffic was backed up for dozens of miles. The governor said the bridge will have to be replaced. And on Wall Street, stocks made up some lost ground after strong corporate earnings reports. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 322 points to close at 38,225. The Nasdaq rose 235 points, or 1.5%, and the S&P 500 added 45. And a European court has sided with Italy against the Getty Museum in California in a fight over an ancient Greek statue. The victorious youth sculpture dates back from 300 to 100 BC. It was pulled from the sea bottom by Italian fishermen in 1964. Italy argues it was illegally sold to the museum in 1977. Getty officials say they're considering a further appeal. Still to come on the NewsHour. After a second gag order hearing, the prosecution in former President Trump's hush money trial continues its case. Young voters in Michigan weigh in on President Biden and the upcoming election. Author Eddie Glaude Jr. discusses his new book on how ordinary Americans can be the heroes of our democracy, plus much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
More than 100 hostages are still being held captive by Hamas. Among them, 8 Americans, including the bodies of 3 Americans confirmed dead and 5 believed to still be alive. Israeli-American Keith Siegel was kidnapped from his home in southern Israel during the Hamas attack on October 7th. I spoke with his niece, Hannah Siegel, earlier today about the status of hostage negotiations and her family's relentless work to bring her uncle home. Hannah, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So your uncle, Keith Siegel, was one of the hostages in a video.
No, incomparable.
We're glad she's home with you. We hope that your uncle Keith is home with you soon. Hannah Siegel, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Amna.
On the stand today in Donald Trump's hush money trial was Los Angeles lawyer Keith Davidson. He negotiated both the Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal hush money agreements at the center of the case against the former president. William Brengham was in court today and joins us now to break down the latest developments. So, William, this was the continuation of Mr. Davidson's testimony about how he actually negotiated these payments.
And that he needs to have the right to say these things. The judge seems somewhat skeptical of that. We don't know when he's going to rule on that yet, though, Jeff.
William Brengham reporting tonight from Manhattan. William, thanks so much.
Thanks, Jeff.
The Supreme Court wrapped up oral arguments last week and has now turned to rolling out decisions. As John Yang explains, they could be some of the most consequential cases of the year. John?
Some of those decisions will shape policies nationwide on such divisive issues like homelessness and reproductive rights.
Or is it somebody who just wants to use stress?
Joan Biskupic, Marcia Coyle, thank you both very much. Sure.
Pleasure, John. Thanks, John.
Young people between the ages of 18 and 29 make up roughly 20% of eligible voters in the U.S. A majority of them voted for President Joe Biden back in 2020, and they're typically a reliable vote for Democrats. Laura Barone Lopez is here with a look at where things stand this election year. Laura?
Thanks, Jeff. In the battleground state of Michigan, news 10 years. So, beware. That's what I'd say to them. A strong threat. We all mean that.
On our bookshelf tonight, a call to action for everyday Americans to reclaim their political destinies from the heroes of our past and present. Princeton University professor Eddie Glaude Jr. argues that is what's needed to secure a just and democratic future for America. It's a case he makes in his new book, We Are the Heroes We've Been Looking For. And he joins us now. Eddie, welcome back to the NewsHour. Always good to see you.
Oh, it's always good to see you. It's a delight.
So it's a beautiful book, let me say.
And cool. But you know what? We can also be miracles. And my God, do we need miracles today.
It's Professor Eddie Glaude Jr., author of the new book, We Are the Heroes We Have Been Looking For. Eddie, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Remember, there's a lot more online, including a look at why U.S. elections seem to stretch on longer than other countries. That is at pbs.org/newshour.
And join us again here tomorrow night for a look at the terrorist threat posed by a resurgent ISIS in Syria. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Navaz. On behalf of the entire...
The death toll from Kenya's devastating rains and floods has risen to at least 179, the government spokesperson said Wednesday.
Sao Tome said Wednesday it would demand compensation from Portugal for damage caused by colonialism. Last week, Portugal's president said late on Tuesday that his country was responsible for crimes committed during the transatlantic slave trade and the colonial era, and suggested there was a need for reparations. Other than Sao Tome, Portugal also colonized Angola, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, and Mozambique. Portugal's rule was characterized by violence, dispossession, and cultural genocide. African countries are increasingly getting bolder with their former colonial rulers. In 2021, Germany agreed to pay Namibia 1.1 billion euros for genocide it committed there. In the DRC, people have pushed President Tshisekedi to demand reparations from Belgium for colonial violence.
Residents of Nairobi, Kenya's capital, have woken up to more losses in property and infrastructural destruction as heavy rains continue to pound the capital. 3 major highways were closed for the better part of Wednesday due to the flooding, while heavy traffic snarl-ups were being experienced. The government has urged people living in flood areas to evacuate. Both travelers and personal drivers are stuck, and no one is doing any business today. I have been stuck here for 30 minutes as people do not want to risk moving and getting swept away. We are hopeful the water will subside and we can move on. I asked the transport minister to stop touring the flooded areas on the chopper. He should be on the road for about 2 weeks so that he can see how people are suffering in their commute, and most importantly, how contractors have done a shoddy job with the road constructions. More than 170 people have died across Kenya since mid-March when the raining season started. The Meteorology Department has warned that more rain is expected this week.
At least 179 people, among them 15 children, have been killed in devastating flooding triggered by heavy rains in Kenya. The new death toll was announced Wednesday by the government spokesman. Isaac Mwora said the month of April marked the peak of the ongoing March-April-May long rains, except for the coastal region, where the rains are expected to peak in May. The heavy rains and flooding have displaced 195,011 people, prompting the government to accommodate flood survivors in schools or establish displacement camps. The government spokesperson reiterated the cabinet's stance on people residing in flood-prone areas, which have been mapped out as fragile ecosystems, to vacate within the 48-hour notice previously issued. Response with the Kenya Defense Forces already enjoined in recovery and evacuation exercises has been stepped up.
The city of Lagos, Nigeria's commercial nerve center. On some of the rooftops here are solar panels. Nearly a decade ago, things looked quite different. Climate technology was new in Africa, and it was tough to get funding for startups that would eventually enable the region's electrification. Today, the ecosystem has since changed.
In 2015, it was a lot more easier. You had a lot of VC-backed VCs very much interested in renewable energy company. You had a lot of grants giving. The strategy at that time was to actually get patient capital that can enable the growth of a lot of the players. Now we're already in, the industry is a bit more tighter, given the value chain is expanded and players are now looking to specific areas in the value chain to play in.
Brainsource Energy, a company that provides solar and battery-based power subscription packages, is benefiting from the recent uptick in private funding.
What we're doing simply is by addressing, in that same manner, decentralized energy. So if we could swap a generator with solar panels one at a time, then we're fixing that problem. Now what we are now doing is doing it on a larger scale. Right now, Brainsource has 2 megawatts of solar capacity in operations all through Nigeria, and we're looking to do about 20 megawatts this year. That's already in process.
Last year, climate tech startups on the continent raised $1 billion, a 9% increase from the previous year and tripled that of 2019.
A lot of the VCs in playing in this space right now in Africa are doing a really fantastic job. I think the room for improvement is now to see that bigger investors now look at the model and participate, right, and take the level of risk that VCs will not be able to venture into to help scale the players who are now moving beyond that seed capital stage, or moving beyond that VC stage, and then help them expand and solve the problem.
It is estimated that Africa requires about $207 billion annually to implement its climate goals. Experts say investors themselves need to expand their scope of interest.
Tonight, breaking news, the sweeping arrests on campuses, the dramatic images tonight from UCLA, and from New York City to Portland, Oregon. How many of these protesters are outside agitators? The new numbers tonight. President Biden this evening saying violent protest is not protected. Also tonight here in the Northeast, the crash and tanker truck explosion shutting down a key part of I-95 in both directions. And severe storms tonight across several states, the disaster just declared. First tonight, the dramatic images of police in riot gear clearing the campus at UCLA. Flashbangs echoing across the university. The overnight operation issued today, removing barricades, dismantling the pro-Palestinian encampment. In New York City, the new images just out, and tonight authorities now say half the protesters arrested at Columbia and elsewhere were not affiliated with schools in the city. Also tonight here on I-95 in the Northeast, that fiery crash shutting down the interstate, the tanker truck carrying gasoline exploding into flames. How long will it be shut down? Tonight, the deadly plane crash into a neighborhood. Authorities now saying the pilot swerving in between homes on his way down. They believe he must have been trying to save lives as the plane was descending. The severe storms and life-threatening flash flooding, a disaster just declared in Texas. We'll time this out. This evening, the dramatic testimony at Donald Trump's criminal trial, and Trump at the end of the day leaving court telling reporters he cannot testify. but legal observers saying he certainly can, and for weeks he said he would. The race for president, and tonight President Biden saying take Donald Trump at his word after Trump refused to commit to accepting the results of the November election. Tonight, the desperate search underway for an American and two friends, brothers, who are now missing while on a trip to Mexico. There is news coming in, several people now detained in connection with their disappearance. Tonight, the safety of ground beef, the USDA testing ground beef for possible traces of bird flu, and the results coming in so far. And tonight, the photo of a rare bird seen right here in the US, the beauty, and you'll see it. It has bird watchers and scientists tonight asking, could this be the first time ever?
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening. It is great to have you with us here on a Thursday night. That crash and explosion here in the Northeast on I-95, closing down the interstate in both directions. We're over the scene tonight. But we begin tonight with the dramatic new images of the crackdown and arrests on campuses across the country. President Biden speaking out for the first time, defending peaceful protests, saying violent protest is not protected. The dramatic images tonight from UCLA, hundreds of protesters defying orders to leave, police moving in overnight and right into today, firing flashbangs to break up the crowds. Confrontations turning physical in the chaos of smoke there. Officials tonight say at UCLA, more than 200 arrested. In Portland, Oregon tonight, officers taking back the library at Portland State University. Police releasing images of ball bearings, makeshift armor, and what they called improvised weapons. In New York City tonight, new images from inside Columbia, and this evening, police now say of the nearly 300 arrests at Columbia and nearby City College, nearly half were outside agitators. ABC's Trevor Ault leading us off, starting with those dramatic images from UCLA early today.
Tonight, the dramatic images of authorities moving in during the overnight hours, cracking down on protesters at UCLA and driving them out, continuing their effort to oust them as the sun came up. The university declaring this pro-Palestinian encampment an unlawful gathering, calling in outside help. Hundreds of officers arriving in riot gear, firing flashbangs and non-lethal ammunition.
Protesters basically spent all of yesterday putting up this barricade. We're pushing law enforcement tearing apart one by one, firing these projectiles here as this encampment is basically slowly coming down.
Protesters donning hard hats and gas masks, at times spraying fire extinguishers, insisting they had no weapons, asking police not to shoot. Officers then moving in.
Law enforcement basically pinned these demonstrators up against the building here. They're being walked away in zip ties. They have been taken into custody peacefully so far.
More than 200 people arrested at UCLA, and in Portland tonight, the dramatic clashes there just today at Portland State University. As officers cleared a library where anti-war protesters had barricaded themselves inside. Police releasing photos of ball bearings and DIY armor they say were homemade weapons.
Interfering or resisting arrest may result in use of force, criminal charges.
And tonight, authorities revealing what they say has become all too common: outside agitators. Of the 12 people arrested in Portland, police say just 4 were actually students.
Let's deploy a flashback!
And tonight in New York, authorities releasing new images from inside the NYPD's raid at Columbia University, making the same point that much of this is being driven by outside agitators. Police in New York say of the 282 people arrested at Columbia and nearby City College, nearly half of them, 134, were not affiliated with the schools. And tonight, after days of protests across the country, President Biden now speaking out, saying order must prevail.
Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest.
The president condemning anti-Semitism and threats of violence against Jewish students. He also spoke out against discrimination against Arab Americans.
There is no place for hate speech or violence of any kind, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or discrimination against Arab Americans or Palestinian Americans. It's simply wrong.
President Biden said the National Guard should not intervene in these protests. He did specify that demonstrations have not swayed his policies on Gaza. And David, here at UCLA tonight, the only thing left of this encampment is this dumpster filled with debris, but you can't rule out the possibility of new demonstrations popping up.
David, much different scene there behind you tonight, Trevor Ault. Thank you. We turn next tonight to that fiery crash north of New York City on I-95, shutting down the interstate in both directions. A gas tanker truck carrying thousands of gallons of fuel colliding with a car at a flatbed truck under an overpass on I-95. This is in Norwalk, Connecticut, these images. The explosion that followed, and tonight word the traffic could be shut down for days. Ariel Reshef over the scene tonight.
Tonight, a crucial stretch of Interstate 95 just north of New York City shut down in both directions after this fiery crash involving a gasoline tanker truck carrying 8,500 gallons of fuel. Norwalk fire officials say it happened around 5:30 this morning.
One car cut off a tractor trailer. This one here, the gasoline tanker, swerved to avoid it, ripped open the back of the gasoline, went down the road. He ended up stopping under the bridge.
Be advised, the Fairfield Ave overpass is completely engulfed on the southbound side, spreading over to the northbound side.
Firefighters took 3 hours to put out the inferno, and the overpass is so badly damaged it will have to be torn down.
Thank God, no serious injuries. But it has resulted in the closing of I-95 north and south.
More than 160,000 vehicles cross this stretch of I-95 every day, including tractor trailers hauling goods from Florida to Maine, now forced to detour on side streets, creating a traffic nightmare.
I'm coming from New Haven, and we got stuck out here for 6 hours so far.
David, you can see that crews are still very much on the scene. Public schools in this area will be closed tomorrow because of all of this. This stretch of I-95 in both directions expected to be closed at least until Monday as crews work to bring down that bridge. David?
Until Monday. All right, Ariel Reshef tonight. Ariel, thank you. We turn now to the deadly plane crash in Augusta, Georgia. The small plane going down in a heavily populated neighborhood, and authorities say the pilot was swerving in between homes on the way down. And tonight they say it is clear he was trying to save lives on his way down. ABC's Faith Abube in Georgia.
Tonight, the pilot who lost his life in this fiery crash hailed as a hero, avoiding homes as a single-engine plane went down in this Augusta, Georgia neighborhood, preventing an even greater tragedy.
It's definitely a miracle. Just by looking at it, the pilot was experienced. Otherwise, he could have landed that plane on a house, on top of a car.
Around 7:15 this morning, Jason McKenzie taking off alone from nearby Daniels Field Airport, turning back to the airfield and hitting a tree. His plane weaving between two homes before bursting into flames just before 8 a.m. Debris raining down, a propeller on the curb, part of a wing caught in branches. McKenzie did not survive.
We heard a pop and kind of knew instantly, hey, something's wrong, and then just heard this crash.
At the time of the crash, community members would have been leaving for work, getting children ready for school. Authorities saying they were lucky.
Very lucky, and we can only credit that pilot for that situation, for having the wherewithal to not involve another structure.
And David, tonight family and friends are remembering that pilot, saying when you met Jason, you liked Jason, and that the community is sad. In the meantime, the FAA and the NTSB are investigating what led up to that crash. David?
Authorities praising that pilot tonight. Faith, thank you. Tonight, a disaster has just been declared in Texas amid life-threatening flash flooding in several states. That disaster declared north of Houston after days of severe weather, tornadoes, and up to 8 inches of rain now. ABC's Maria Villarreal in Texas with the extraordinary images tonight.
Tonight, dangerous storms triggering life-threatening flash flooding and evacuations in the south. Drivers stranded on flooded roads near Houston. Authorities just issuing a disaster declaration.
In 25 years that I've lived here, I've never seen it flood like this.
What are you doing? You're driving into the creek. No, stop!
Onlookers screaming as rushing water swept this car away in College Station, Texas, northwest of Houston.
Good news, the girl was okay.
That driver escaping, clinging to a rail. Up to 8 inches of rain falling in some areas. In northeast Kansas, watch as a monster EF3 tornado packing 140-mile-per-hour winds sent debris flying on Tuesday. That terrifying funnel swirling overhead. At least one person killed, nearly 24 homes destroyed.
And David, our weather team is tracking another round of severe weather that is expected to hit central Texas, bringing with it hail and the possibility of more tornadoes. That weather system expected to hit the Austin area and right here in Dallas overnight. David?
Watching these storms into the night, Maria, thank you. Here in New York City tonight, the dramatic testimony at Donald Trump's criminal trial today. Jurors hearing about Donald Trump's alleged efforts to keep Stormy Daniels quiet, allegedly well into his presidency. And tonight, what did Donald Trump mean when he said late today, "I cannot testify"? Aaron Katursky at the courthouse.
Tonight, Donald Trump off the campaign trail and right back in front of a judge. Jurors hearing testimony that his efforts to keep Stormy Daniels quiet about their alleged affair lasted well into his presidency. The porn star was paid $130,000 12 days before the 2016 election so voters wouldn't hear her story. The money came from Trump's former fixer Michael Cohen, and Trump then paid him back. Prosecutors charged the former president illegally falsified business records to make it look like a legal expense. Trump claims Cohen acted on his own, but in court, prosecutors played a recording of a phone call between Cohen and Daniels' lawyer at the time, Keith Davidson. Cohen telling him Trump often complained about paying the hush money.
I can't even tell you how many times he said to me, I hate the fact that we did it. And my comment to him was, but every person that you've spoken to told you it was the right move.
Davidson testified that after the election, Cohen kept in touch, making sure Stormy Daniels was keeping quiet. When stories about Trump and Daniels began bubbling up in 2018, Davidson says Cohen had him draft multiple statements in the porn star's name, one denying a sexual and/or romantic affair with Donald Trump. Davidson insisting the letter was technically true because no one ever alleged that any interaction between she and Mr. Trump was romantic.
Stormy Daniels!
But Stormy Daniels was done playing along.
Did you sign this letter that was released today?
I don't know, did I?
Wait a minute, that you can say,
That doesn't
right?
look like my signature, does it?
Davidson testified Daniels was eager to talk about her life and reinvigorate her career, and at that point, neither Michael Cohen nor Donald Trump could stop her. Trump has repeatedly said he would testify in his own defense, but today, on his way out of court, he made this false claim.
Well, I'm not allowed to testify. I'm under a gag order. I guess I can't testify.
The gag order does not prevent Trump from testifying, as he has said on at least 3 different occasions he would. Every criminal defendant, David, has the right to testify in his or her own defense. That includes Donald Trump. David?
Aaron Katursky at the courthouse again tonight. Thank you, Aaron. Meantime, in the race for the White House, Donald Trump refusing to commit now to accepting the results of the upcoming November election. And President Biden tonight saying, take Donald Trump at his word on this. Here's Mary Bruce.
Tonight, the Biden campaign is calling Donald Trump a danger to the Constitution and a threat to our democracy, after the former president refused to say he would accept the results of the election. Trump telling the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, if everything's honest, I'd gladly accept the results. If it's not, you have to fight for the right of the country. Tonight, President Biden saying, take Trump at his word. Our Karen Travers asking him,
Are you worried that Trump says he won't accept the election results?
Earlier this week, when Trump was asked by Time magazine if he's concerned about violence if he doesn't win, he said, if we don't win, it depends. It always depends on the fairness of an election. Biden has been ramping up his warnings.
He promises, quote, a bloodbath if he loses. This guy denies January 6th. Listen to what he says, because he means it.
The president urging voters to take this seriously as some of Trump's language echoes what he said in the run-up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The Biden campaign concerned that Trump supporters may be listening closely. David?
Mary Bruce live at the White House tonight. Mary, thank you. When we come back here, the desperate search for an American and 2 friends, 2 brothers, missing while on a trip to Mexico. There is news coming in tonight. Several people detained in connection with this disappearance. And tonight, take a look at this image, an orangutan, and what scientists now say he used to heal himself, something never seen before. In a moment. Tonight, authorities are searching for an American and 2 friends, 2 Australian brothers missing during a trip to Mexico. Jack Carter Road there on the right of your screen, and his 2 friends to the left vanished in Baja California on Mexico's northwest coast. Their families haven't heard from them in at least 4 days now. Authorities tonight say 3 people are now being detained in connection with their disappearance. When we come back in the broadcast tonight, the USDA testing ground beef for any signs of bird flu. Their first results in tonight. And scientists stunned by what that injured orangutan used to heal himself in a moment. To the index of other news tonight, the USDA revealing results of ground beef tested for possible bird flu fragments. Federal officials tonight say all 30 samples tested negative. They were collected from states where dairy cows had tested positive for the virus. The USDA says the negative results tonight confirm the meat supply is safe. Tonight, meanwhile, Ford recalling 243,000 Maverick pickups here in the U.S. The automaker warning the truck's taillights could go dark, raising the risk of a possible crash. The recall includes certain pickups from model years 2022 to 2024. Ford says there have been no reports of crashes or injuries. Owners will be notified by mail. Tonight, remarkable research showing for the first time a wild animal using a medicinal plant on their own to treat an open wound. Scientists from a distance studying an orangutan with an injury on his face just under his eyelid there. He is seen chewing a leafy plant and using the paste to relieve the pain and treat the wound himself. The injury healing about after a week. Scientists say it's the first time they've seen a wild animal apply medicine to a wound. A study appearing in the journal Scientific Reports. When we come back here tonight, the stunning image, you'll see the beautiful bird captured in a photograph. Can you identify it? And is this the first time one has been seen in the U.S.? Body tonight here, bird watchers and scientists are very excited about an image captured on a beach in Oregon. One beautiful bird. Tonight in Oregon at Hub Point State Park west of Portland, an incredible and perhaps first of its kind image here in the U.S. You're looking at what birdwatchers believe is a blue rock thrush, a species never before documented here in the United States, native to Europe and Asia, known for its unique colored blue back and chestnut front. The image captured by amateur photographer and middle school teacher Michael Sanchez. He was there at sunrise taking photos of the beach when all of a sudden he spots the beautiful bird. And right here tonight,
hello, David.
That teacher telling us he shared the images hoping to officially identify the bird.
Before I knew it, I had folks from birding associations getting in touch with me, asking me about this bird. It has been a wild ride.
The discovery sending birdwatchers flocking to that state park. The photo now being studied by scientists. And joining us tonight,
hi David.
Brody Cass-Telvin from the Bird Alliance of Oregon.
It's probably the rarest bird that's ever been recorded in Oregon. It's also first in the United States.
Tonight, birdwatchers everywhere excited.
The leading theory is that this bird was migrating, encountered a storm, got blown out to sea, and potentially found a passing ship headed to the United States.
And this evening, that middle school teacher and amateur photographer, proud of his find.
What I'm mostly happy about is this brings a little bit of joy and a little bit of beauty to everybody's lives.
A lot of beauty, and we thank you. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Moore, America's most watched newscast.
Look, kid going to college. I'm a dad. I've got 3 young kids in the household. He's concerned about how my wife was doing. Obviously, she had a cancer scare a couple years ago. So it was just a good meeting and a good conversation. But he understands the importance of this election. He understands the damage that Biden is doing. And I think you would see 180-degree different policies if we're able to win in November, which is important that we do.
Last question. The issue of abortion and the legalization of marijuana will be on the ballot in Florida. I see that the Democrats want to demagogue the issue of abortion as much as possible. Do you think those two issues in any way have any impact on the state of Florida in terms of the vote in 24?
No, but I think both of those need to be defeated. The recreational marijuana is the most broad, non-medical marijuana. It would be everywhere. The state would smell like it. We don't need that in Florida. The abortion amendment would be the most radical abortion regime in the world. It eliminates parental consent for minors. It allows abortion up until birth and doesn't even require a physician to be involved. So vote no on both of those. But I think regardless of how those turn out, Republicans are going to carry the day in Florida pretty significantly.
Yeah, by the way, I just left a state that everywhere you go, that's all you smell. That's one of the great things about Florida. I get to breathe free air. Anyway, Governor, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it. All right, coming up, one of the groups of students is now allegedly demanding that their finals be canceled. Wow. Why? Because of the anti-Israel protests. Senator Tom Cotton, he'll weigh in as we continue. Stories of the anti-Israel protesters making ridiculous demands. At Columbia, all the protesters there requested, quote, basic humanitarian aid, which actually meant that they wanted food and drinks delivered to them while they were illegally occupying a campus building. Over at UCLA, protesters had a whole list of stuff that they wanted people to send them, including, let's see, vegan and gluten-free food, rain ponchos, knee pads, and tonight, according to reports at Columbia, well, the student editors of the Law Review, they are now asking to have their final exams canceled and for everyone to be given a free pass on their grades. Why? They had to witness the police action to end the protest, and it was too traumatizing. They were triggered. Kind of amazing that they were not equally triggered by the horrific evil and events of October the 7th. You know, the murders, the rapes, the torture, the kidnapping of even young babies, even decapitating of young babies. Here and now, Senator Tom Cotton. Senator, great to have you back. Thank you, my friend. Am I wrong in believing that the U.S. Supreme Court weighed in on the issue of student loan forgiveness as it relates to Joe Biden?
No, Sean, you're not wrong at all. They said last year they couldn't do it, and Joe Biden immediately said he's going to start doing it anyway. And, we've been around long enough. We can remember Democrats were always accusing Donald Trump of disobeying court orders or taking other authoritarian steps, and he didn't do any of that. But it's Joe Biden who, for instance, is disobeying Supreme Court orders, finding new ways to reward his would-be voters, trying to lock up his chief political opponent by weaponizing the legal system. And that means that some of these fanatics and pro-Hamas sympathizers and little Gazas all across America could be eligible to get their student loans canceled. That's why I've introduced legislation with several of my colleagues in the Senate, the No Bailouts for Campus Criminals Act, that would say if you've been arrested and convicted of crimes related to this mob action on campus, the federal government is never going to bail you out from your student loans.
So basically, you're telling us that the president is lawless. He's defying a Supreme Court decision. He's not enforcing the laws as it relates to abortion. allowed in over 10 million unvetted illegal immigrants, many from our top geopolitical foes, including Iran, Syria, Egypt, and Afghanistan, and Russia and China. And so he only picks and chooses which laws he wants to enforce, which court orders he wants to abide by. Is that how it works in our country? Because I was taught otherwise. And why do I believe that if I ever did the same thing, that I don't think I'd get away with it?
No, Sean, it's pretty certain you wouldn't. And again, this is what Joe Biden and liberals have accused Donald Trump of for the last 9 years. But when Donald Trump lost a court case, might have upset him, but he followed the court case. Joe Biden didn't just disregard the Supreme Court last year. He openly and joyously said that he was going to defy them, that he was going to find a way to pay off his would-be voters. And Sean, I think there's a link between that kind of accusation that's just false against Donald Trump, which is on campuses today. For 9 years, liberals have fantasized in their own mind that somehow their brave resistance was going to stop fascism from arriving in America and that Donald Trump was a latter-day Hitler. In reality, Sean, what we see on campus have been nascent pogroms, exactly the kind of things that the Nazis did to Jews in the 1930s. And the liberal silence or even celebration of these little Gazas on campus tells us exactly what they would have actually done in Germany in the 1930s.
So your bill is called the No Bailouts for Campus Criminals Act. Here's a little itsy-bitsy problem we have. In New York, they have no bail laws. In New York, most of the people that got arrested the first time, they were all released and their records expunged. Most of them basically got the equivalent of a parking ticket, even people that took over Hamilton Hall at Columbia. There won't be any criminal prosecutions. Alvin Bragg was very, very clear in saying, well, I'm not sure if anybody's going to get charged here. He's too busy trying a case from 8 years ago about a record-keeping error of the Trump organization, even though the statute of limitations had passed and the judge in the case donated to Joe Biden and may have a family financial benefit if, in fact, that story is accurate. Does that sound like American justice to you?
No, Sean, it doesn't. But it does sound like what you could expect from a crooked hack like Alvin Bragg. But I can tell you this, even if Alvin Bragg and other liberal DAs and mayors don't want to bring charges, some of what we've seen on college campuses lately could violate federal criminal civil rights laws, subjecting Jewish students to harassment or even assault. And there is a federal role to play here. And I don't expect Joe Biden to do that. But in January, when Donald Trump is president again, the Department of Justice and the Department of Education should investigate these potential crimes. They should certainly investigate the universities, whether or not they're upholding their obligations to protect Jewish student civil rights. A lot of these universities have a lot of money at risk coming January when Donald Trump is president again.
They have massive endowments. Not one penny should be given to any of these institutions. I'll tell you, number one. And number two, the Supreme Court needs to weigh in again, and their order should be followed. We do have checks and balances.
On this Thursday night, new details about a deadly police pursuit in Ontario.
Someone's going to get hurt.
Why officers chased a vehicle going the wrong way on Canada's busiest highway. Plus, who survived the crash. Unrelenting unrest, the counter-protest at McGill.
It's a big shame.
As police arrest hundreds and clear the encampment at UCLA.
Get back! Get back! Get back!
And Ontario First Nations' new triumph against a neighboring chemical plant.
It's still going to be an uphill battle.
What the facility is now being ordered to do. And clearing the air, the new report card on how well Canada is doing curbing emissions.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is new information tonight about that police chase and horrific crash along Canada's busiest highway. The high-speed police chase going the wrong way on the 401 ended in a multi-vehicle crash. A 3-month-old baby boy was killed along with his grandparents who were visiting from India. Today, Ontario Special Investigations Unit revealed the baby's parents who live in Ajax, Ontario, were also in that vehicle and they survived. The robbery suspect police were chasing also died, but why he was pursued going the wrong way is still under intense scrutiny. Mike Drolet has our top story on the police radio recordings, giving a glimpse into those final moments.
It all unfolded quickly as a suspect in Monday's liquor store robbery east of Toronto turned the wrong way onto a highway on-ramp. At least one officer in pursuit raised a red flag.
Just want to make sure the Durham sergeant's aware that they're driving the opposite direction. Someone's going to get hurt.
10-4, we're calling him out.
Okay, there's like 6 Durham cruisers that are going following the vehicle the wrong way.
We know now that officer was right because minutes later, the suspect van would collide with a transport truck and at least 4 other vehicles, resulting in 4 deaths. And new information has come to light. According to an internal police report acquired by the Toronto Star, a senior officer tried to call off the chase 3 minutes before the deadly collision. Yet one of the officers involved believed the lights on the police car would alert the public that something was wrong.
When I look at the standard operating procedures for police departments in Ontario, you can clearly see it's going to be difficult to justify the continuation of this pursuit from the outset.
Officers in Ontario do have some leeway when it comes to pursuits. The Police Service Act requires officers to weigh the severity of the crime against the risk to public safety. But a study released last year by the US-based Police Executive Research Forum called for police to begin a pursuit only if a violent crime has been committed and there's imminent threat to the public, a much stricter policy the RCMP adopted after its own study in 2021. Vehicle pursuit alternatives include helicopters, spike belts, a device called the grappler, and the use of pit maneuvers to disable vehicles. Former West Vancouver Police Chief Cash Heath says he had his officers trained to block suspect vehicles from escaping.
We found that if you let it go more than 2 blocks, in all likelihood the supervisor may have to call it off because of the dangerous maneuvering of the suspect vehicle.
Would any of those tactics have worked in Toronto? The chase lasted 20 minutes, covering roughly 25 kilometers before entering the highway. Factors the Special Investigations Unit will have to weigh as the investigation unfolds. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Pro-Palestinian protesters camping out at the University of Toronto have been told to vacate that campus by 10 p.m. tonight. They have said they won't move. They've joined students at universities across Canada and the U.S., pressuring schools to divest from Israel. There are now 6 major encampments across Canada. In BC, pro-Palestinian camps have sprung up at the University of British Columbia, the University of Victoria, and Vancouver Island University. In Ontario, encampments are still set up at the University of Ottawa and at the University of Toronto. And in Quebec, the encampment at Montreal's McGill University was confronted today by a counter-protest. Pro-Israeli demonstrators gathered on the other side of the fence from where the pro-Palestinian camp is set up. Mike Armstrong was there.
The fence in front of McGill University, usually decorative, served Thursday an unintended purpose. It kept protesters and counter-protesters apart, with police in between. On the inside, the encampment. 6 days in, it swelled with supporters. A joint message calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and for McGill to divest from Israel.
The students want to leave. They don't want to stay here. They just want their demands to be met.
Now, on the other side of the fence, the counter-protest. Organizers say it was called in support of Jewish students who don't feel safe on campus. Jews, they say, have been threatened and intimidated around the encampment.
I was not with an Israeli flag. I was just we're wearing a kippah. So if it's not anti-Semitism, what is it?
Well, despite no shortage of emotion, the situation didn't escalate. The encampment organizers kept people far enough away from the fence, and while police were present, riot police were stationed nearby, out of sight but ready.
From the beginning, it's been peaceful. We have, since Saturday, we were here not far where there was always a police presence.
Dismantle encampments.
Quebec's premier waded into the issue Thursday. He's calling on police to shut down the encampment. McGill is private property, he says, and has told protesters to leave.
Everybody in Quebec has to respect laws. And right now, these encampments are illegal.
Now, while the premier wants the protesters out, he's not saying it has to be right away. When, he says, should be up to police. And that certainly wasn't going to be today. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
The protests have been much bigger on campuses in the U.S., and more than 2,000 students have now been arrested. Today, President Joe Biden said the right to free speech and the rule of law must be protected, but not violent protests.
Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest.
The University of California, Los Angeles was the focus of police action overnight. Counter-protesters had descended on the campus, and university authorities were quickly overwhelmed. Jackson Prosco reports on how frustration keeps escalating on American campuses and the challenge of how to deal with it.
In the dead of night, police in riot gear fired rubber bullets and deployed flashbangs, ripping apart barricades and clearing tents at UCLA.
We're not leaving! We're not leaving!
More than 200 people were arrested, including this woman, who identified herself as a student.
We have to challenge these systems of oppression so that we can free Gaza and free all peoples that are oppressed.
It came the day after counter-protesters sparred with the demonstrators. In that case, police were criticized for failing to intervene.
For them to come out the next night to remove us from the encampment after they felt absolutely no obligation or duty to protect the first night, it doesn't make any sense.
Anger and division are rippling through American universities. In Washington, dueling protests were kept apart on a campus just blocks from the White House.
Police here have so far taken a hands-off approach, preferring to leave the protesters alone so long as they remain peaceful.
We're a civil society, and order must prevail.
After weeks of silence, President Joe Biden addressed the unrest. He faces heavy criticism from progressives over police use of force, while Republicans accuse him of allowing anti-Semitism and violence on campuses.
Look, it's basically a matter of fairness. It's a matter of what's right. There's the right to protest, but not the right to cause chaos.
Those words seem unlikely to have an impact, especially as the conflict rages overseas.
And really didn't tell people where he was on this issue. They really took the safe way out and probably made nobody happy.
Back at Columbia University, where the protests began, students are marching outside the now locked down campus, vowing not to give up the fight until their demands are met. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
In Gaza, there is a new snapshot of the extent of the catastrophic damage from nearly 7 months of Israeli bombardment and what it could take to rebuild. UNICEF says nearly all the roughly 600,000 children sheltering in the southern Gaza city of Rafah are injured, sick, or malnourished. And according to the Hamas-run health ministry, more than 34,500 Palestinians have been killed, most of them women and children. The destruction in Gaza, according to a new UN report, is on a scale not seen since the Second World War. The UN assessment says more than 79,000 homes have been completely destroyed, another 370,000 damaged. It estimates that in the best case scenario, it will take until 2040 to rebuild all the destroyed homes. That's if construction materials are delivered 5 times faster than after the last Gaza crisis in 2021. Israel's prime minister continues to say a ground offensive into Rafah will go ahead with or without a ceasefire deal. The proposal reportedly includes a 40-day pause in fighting to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza and the exchange of almost 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for up to 33 Israeli hostages. Crystal Commanding reports on where those negotiations stand and the pressure on Israel's prime minister.
Desperate and despondent families of Israeli hostages jumped into rush hour traffic to grab attention. For months, chants of now and all of them now have risen above the streets and squares across Israel to remind their leaders about loved ones languishing in Gaza.
We need to stop the war. We need to bring back the hostages home. Enough. It's 7 months already. There is no time for the hostages. They will be all dead.
While the world waits for Hamas to respond to Israel's latest proposal to pause fighting and exchange prisoners, Israeli military vehicles are assembling near Gaza's southern border, possibly to enter Rafah, the southern city where more than 1 million displaced people are sheltering without adequate facilities.
It's on Hamas. Hamas has to decide whether it will take this deal and actually
advance the situation for the people that it purports to care about in Gaza.
Despite international and some local opposition to a ground offensive in Rafah, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that the operation will go forward regardless of a deal. A statement he reiterated Thursday, saying Israel will do what is necessary in order to win. Netanyahu and his military leadership have also pledged to bring the 133 remaining hostages home. Blocking traffic holding a banner that reads, "Rafah or hostages, choose life." The priority for these Israelis is clear. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
A fourth teenager has been charged with second-degree murder in the stabbing death of a Halifax student who came to Canada as a refugee from Syria. 16-year-old Ahmed Al-Marash was found badly injured in a shopping mall parkade last week. He later died in hospital. 3 other teenagers are being held in custody until their next court appearance. A chemical plant next to an Ontario First Nation is ordered to shut down. Coming up, what it must do if it wants to reopen. The people of a small Ontario First Nation, long exposed to high levels of pollution, are celebrating a victory tonight. The province has ordered a chemical plant to stay shut until the province is satisfied it can operate more safely. Many people in Aamjiwnaang First Nation say they became sick last month after high levels of the cancer-causing chemical benzene were detected. They, along with the province, have said a chemical plant across the street is the primary source. That plant voluntarily closed for maintenance just over a week ago. Now the province says it must stay shut until changes are made. Carolyn Jarvis reports.
It definitely does feel like, a big win for us, like nothing this big has really happened before.
It's not often a small community of scarcely 1,000 people forces a chemical plant to its knees. But after weeks of outcry and anger, today there was excitement and a feeling that the people of Aamjiwnaang were finally heard.
Our people have been getting sick, and it's just gone on for far too long.
The province of Ontario ordered Ineos Styrolution, located mere steps from the First Nation, to remain closed until it can limit its pollution. Specifically, benzene, a cancer-causing chemical which for weeks has been detected at alarming levels at air monitors just across the street.
We need to think about what happens when they do reopen.
The province has a list of conditions for restarting, which must be completed and approved to mitigate benzene emissions. But the concern among some is that those measures don't go far enough.
If you look at the requirements for restarting the facility, they are not best in class.
In a statement Tuesday, Ineos said no one on our site has reported feeling unwell, and it did not breach its emissions limit set at the time in April. That's because Ineos and several other industrial plants around Aamjiwnaang are exempt from Ontario's annual limit for benzene under what's called a technical standard.
And I think we've seen that has resulted in levels of benzene in Sarnia that pose unacceptable risk to people who live there.
And so while there is optimism, the people of Aamjiwnaang know they must remain advocates for their own health.
We are not backing down.
Carolyn Jarvis, Global News, Toronto.
Reality check ahead. Is Canada making meaningful progress in curbing carbon emissions? There are some signs Canada is making progress on reducing carbon emissions. New federal data shows emissions in 2022 were the lowest they've been in 25 years, with the exception of the first 2 years of the pandemic. The government claims its climate policies are working. Mackenzie Gray has a reality check on whether Canada is actually on track to meet its targets.
It's a central part of the Liberals' political message. If you stand in the way of clean energy development and pollution reduction, you're standing in the way of sustained economic success for Canadians. But the latest report from the Environment Department outlines a mixed bag on their efforts to curb emissions. In 2022, greenhouse gases actually went up 1.3% to a total of 708 megatons. That's the equivalent of 260 million cars on the road. Despite the slight increase, the Environment Minister points to a bigger trend. This updated report shows significantly lower emissions by 44 million tons than our pre-pandemic levels. Emissions are at their lowest they've been in 25 years, with the exception of 2020 and 2021 during COVID. Emissions cuts, alongside a growing Canadian economy, an important sign for environmentalists.
You think about electric vehicles, LED light bulbs, energy efficiency in industry, and those are counteracting the rise in emissions for more economic activity.
While that is a positive trend, it's not good enough to meet the government's pollution targets, according to the Environment Commissioner.
Surprisingly, there is no overarching industrial decarbonization policy to provide innovation, science, and economic development Canada with a clear picture of which industries are most in need of funds to reduce emissions.
The Liberals' own goal is to cut emissions by 40% from 2005 levels by 2030, but currently they've only been slashed by 7.1%.
We're not bending the curve at the scale and pace needed. We know we need to do much more in order to avoid really the most catastrophic and irreversible outcomes.
One thing that's not included in the emissions numbers, the impact of natural disasters like forest fires, which last year alone, Donna, were estimated to be triple an entire year's worth of emissions.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. There was a bit of a signal today from the Governor of the Bank of Canada about interest rates. Tiff Macklem told MPs today all key inflation indicators are moving in the right direction.
What most Canadians want to know is when are we going to reduce our policy interest rate? The short answer is we are getting closer. We are seeing what we need to see. We just need to see it for longer.
The next decision on whether to cut rates is June 5th. For now, the key interest rate is holding at 5%. In the U.S., the Federal Reserve held its benchmark rate steady at about 5.5%, saying it is taking longer than expected there to get inflation under control. Next, the power
Yango.
of student protests and how it can force change. There is a long history of student protest on university campuses, young people objecting to what they perceive to be oppression and injustice and making their voices heard. The idealism of youth can be a powerful force, and it is for the most part peaceful. Eric Sorensen looks at how campus protests have stayed the same over the years and what's changed.
At the core of growing campus protests are students, idealistic and passionate.
There is a noble history to it at Columbia University in New York, where students against the war in Gaza occupied iconic Hamilton Hall this week. Columbia was at the heart of the anti-war movement that fueled America's turning against the Vietnam War in the 1960s. Mark Rudd was there.
And we're going back now. What they're doing is they're trying to wake up the rest of us.
Rudd sees parallels today as students watch the bombing and devastation in Gaza.
I think they consider it to be a moral atrocity, and they're sick at heart. And as I was 56 years ago. And we felt the moral impetus to act. They're doing the same thing.
But there are differences. 1960s campuses were mostly white, privileged kids, united against a U.S.-led war. Today, campuses are much more diverse, giving rise to divergent views, including support for Palestinians in Gaza.
Students have chosen to join the call that stands in a steadfast solidarity with the people of Gaza.
Young people are often very committed to issues of global justice as they see them. Campuses have always been a place where social movements found a voice, found the ability to organize.
But when protesters chant "from the river to the sea," that sounds to many Jewish people like promoting the annihilation of Israel.
Chanting for the erasure of the Jewish state and the death of my family. So I do feel a little heartbroken by this.
Students clashing with students, a sign of the diversity on campuses today. One student sees the pro-Palestinian protests in solidarity with student movements of the past.
We have not only the privilege, but the responsibility to continue in the shoes of those who came before us. That's what education is for, right? It's to frame the way that you look at the world.
The military conflict in Gaza has become a social struggle in North America. Support for Palestinians growing, traditional backing for Israel being tested, and it's all playing out once more on college campuses. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
That's Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Grossmore National Park, Newfoundland and Labrador. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Farah Nasser will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I will see you again on Monday. Bye-bye.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In California, riot police have moved in on the Gaza Solidarity encampment at the UCLA campus, making arrests and violently dismantling the peaceful protest site. Students reported serious injuries as the officers raided the camp, shooting rubber bullets and flashbangs. We'll go to LA after headlines as the situation there continues to develop. On Wednesday, police also made dozens of arrests at the Gaza Solidarity encampments at Dartmouth College, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and the University of Arizona. Here in New York, police moved in on Fordham University protesters just hours after they set up their encampment at Fordham's Lincoln Square campus in Manhattan. The Fordham raid came a day after New York police arrested nearly 300 protesters at Columbia University and the City College of New York. On Wednesday, New York City Mayor Eric Adams defended the police raids and claimed outside agitators were trying to, quote, radicalize young people, unquote. Meanwhile, on Columbia's campus, faculty members addressed students. Palestinian-American historian and professor of modern Arab studies, Rashid Khalidi, evoked Columbia's 1968 protests, telling students their actions would one day be commemorated in the same way.
This is the conscience of a nation, speaking through your kids, through young people who are risking their futures, who are risking suspension, expulsion, criminal arrest in order to wake people up in this country.
As the crackdown on the student uprising intensifies, the House has passed a bill to widen the federal definition of anti-Semitism. Critics of the bill included Jerry Nadler, the most senior Jewish member of Congress and a strong supporter of Israel. Nadler said, quote, this bill threatens to chill constitutionally protected speech. Speech that is critical of Israel alone does not constitute discrimination. The bill sweeps too broadly, Nadler said. In Gaza, UNICEF is warning an Israeli ground attack on Rafah would bring catastrophe on top of catastrophe. The UN agency estimates there are 600,000 Palestinian children crammed into Rafah. On Tuesday, Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, called for the total annihilation of Rafah and other Gaza cities. While negotiations continue over a temporary ceasefire, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken Wednesday Israel will refuse to end its assault on Gaza as part of any deal with Hamas to free hostages. This comes as aid deliveries for Gaza continue to come under attack. Jordan's foreign ministry has accused Israeli settlers of attacking 2 Jordanian aid convoys carrying food, flour, and other aid. Meanwhile, humanitarian aid has passed through the Erez crossing for the first time since October 7th, but aid groups say Israel must allow in far more aid as Gaza faces famine. Back in the United States, city councils in Boston and Tacoma City, Washington, adopted Gaza ceasefire resolutions this week, while the Bloomington, Indiana City Council overrode their mayor's veto of its ceasefire resolution. In California, Richmond City Council voted to divest from Israel. Last week, Hawaii's House of Representatives passed a ceasefire resolution, joining the Hawaiian Senate, which passed their own resolution in March. Meanwhile, Bloomberg is reporting the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are nearing a deal to give Saudi Arabia new security guarantees and access to advanced U.S. weapons. Diplomats say this could lead to Saudi Arabia and Israel establishing diplomatic ties. In other international developments, the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, has announced Colombia is cutting diplomatic ties with Israel. Petro made the comment during a May Day rally in Bogota.
Creo que hoy la humanidad toda en las calles por millones está de acuerdo con nosotros.
I believe that today all of humanity in the streets by the millions agree with us and we agree with them. It cannot be the times of genocide, of the extermination of an entire people can't return before our eyes, before our passivity. If Palestine dies, humanity dies, and we will not let it die.
Colombian President Petro's announcement came as May Day rallies around the world expressed solidarity with Gaza and Palestinian workers. Here in the U.S., some members of the United Auto Workers called on their president Sean Fain to rescind the union's endorsement of Biden over his support for Israel.
As a UAW member and as the president of my local, UAW must use its political power to petition into their call for a ceasefire. UAW must revoke endorsements of these politicians if they want to make good of their call for a ceasefire.
The UAW has endorsed a ceasefire. Tens of thousands of students and workers joined May Day protests in New York. In the Republic of Georgia, a parliamentary session has been canceled as protests swell in the capital Tbilisi against what's known as the Foreign Influence Bill. Critics say the bill uses Kremlin-inspired measures to crush dissent and moves Georgia away from Europe and closer to Moscow. The bill, pushed by the ruling Georgian Dream Party, is just one vote away from passage. Police have deployed pepper spray, tear gas, water cannons against protesters near the parliament. Kenya's president Tuesday ordered the nationwide evacuation of all residents living along riverbanks as the country continues to be devastated by massive floods. On Monday, at least 50 people were killed after a dam burst in the Rift Valley, with torrents of water and mud gushing down and destroying homes in its path. Large areas of Kenya have been devastated by flooding over the past 2 months, killing some 170 people. Flood survivors describe the chaos.
When I opened the dining room door, the water gushed in and made its way through the kitchen. That is how I got out of the house. My husband was forced back into the house by the water, and by that time, the house had already started coming down. He managed to quickly maneuver and get out. My daughters, who were in the next room, were swept out of the house by the force of the water.
Reuters reports 10,000 people have lost their homes in Nairobi alone due to floods. A former employee of Spirit Aerosystems who blew the whistle on the Boeing supplier's manufacturing and quality control issues has died. 45-year-old Joshua Dean died of a sudden illness after he contracted an MRSA infection and pneumonia. Dean had accused his former employer, Spirit Aerosystems, of firing him in retaliation for speaking out against the company, including in a shareholder lawsuit last year. Spirit Aerosystems built the door panel that blew out of the Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9 in January. Josh Dean's death comes 2 months after Boeing whistleblower John Barnett was found dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound shortly after giving evidence in a lawsuit against Boeing. Arizona State Senate voted Wednesday to repeal its 1864 near-total ban on abortions after 2 Republicans joined their Democratic colleagues. The House already voted for repealing the Civil War-era ban last week, and Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs is expected to sign the bill into law, thereby reinstating a 2022 law that also bans abortions, but after 15 weeks of pregnancy. But the 1864 ban could temporarily go into effect this summer due to procedural rules unless the state Supreme Court approves a motion by Planned Parenthood to stay the ban until the repeal can be enacted. Arizona Democrats and abortion advocates celebrated the Senate vote Wednesday. This is Athena Salman of Reproductive Freedom for All.
Taking our anger and frustration straight to the ballot box this November and voting for reproductive freedom for all. And first and foremost, that includes flipping the Arizona House and flipping the Arizona Senate so we can protect abortion rights in the future.
The United Methodist Church overwhelmingly voted to overturn its 40-year ban on LGBTQ+ clergy Wednesday. Delegates at the UMC General Conference also voted not to penalize clergy who ordain same-sex unions, effectively allowing same-sex marriage in the church. The historic move caps off a years-long struggle to end LGBTQ+ discrimination within the church. Over recent years, around a quarter of UMC congregations have split from the church over its acceptance of LGBTQ rights. And President Biden announced another $6 billion in student loan relief, this time for over 300,000 borrowers who attended the art institutes. Biden said the now shuttered group of for-profit colleges, quote, knowingly misled students and cheated borrowers into taking on mountains of debt without leading to promising career prospects. The Biden administration has now canceled $160 billion of student debt for some 4.6 million borrowers since the Supreme Court blocked a plan to cancel over $400 billion in federal debt. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Narmeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
More than 200 of those arrests happening at UCLA. Police using flashbangs, firing non-lethal projectiles as they move in to rip down the pro-Palestinian encampment. New body cam from the NYPD officers the other night breaching that building at Columbia and arresting protesters inside. Our report coming up. Also tonight, President Biden condemning the clashes on campuses, saying violent protest is not protected. His 2024 rival, Donald Trump, praising the NYPD crackdown, calling it a beautiful thing. The massive fireball on I-95, a fuel tanker colliding with a tractor trailer and a car in Connecticut. No injuries, but how long could the interstate be shut down? The evacuations ordered in Texas. Widespread flooding, submerging homes, roads, and cars. Former President Trump back in court as his criminal trial resumes. The former attorney for Stormy Daniels on the stand testifying about hush money payments as prosecutors ask the judge to hold Mr. Trump in contempt again. New troubles for Britney Spears. An ambulance called to a landmark LA hotel after sources say the pop star got into an altercation with her boyfriend. And the Lego legend, turning the landmarks in our nation's capital into mini masterpieces.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome. More dramatic takedowns at college protest encampments, leaving hundreds more arrested. But tonight, the pro-Palestinian movement they joined is still alive and playing out at dozens more of the tent camps that have popped up at other campuses across the country. California Highway Patrol officers on the front lines of a crackdown at UCLA overnight, tearing down the makeshift barricades erected by pro-Palestinian supporters and moving in to arrest those who defied orders to disperse. The sweeping operation captured on live TV. President Biden breaking his silence on the demonstrations, expressing his support for peaceful protests, but adding we're a civil society and order must prevail. An NBC News count shows over 2,100 people have been arrested nationwide since the demonstrations began. Tonight we take you into the chaos. Here's Liz Grace.
With the clashes between college campus demonstrators and police reaching new heights, today President Biden condemning violent disruptive protests.
Vandalism,
trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not peaceful protest. It's against the law.
Dozens of universities and colleges across the country continuing to grapple with how to handle the growing movement of pro-Palestinian demonstrators. This morning at UCLA, law enforcement breaching the massive encampment just before dawn.
All right, police are right here right now. You can hear the flashbangs there, but the police, they are breaching the barrier, trying to make their way into the encampment. The students, though, they're pushing back and trying to hold the line.
Demonstrators, many of them in hard helmets and gas masks, appearing to use fire extinguishers aimed at police trying to fend them off. Police pushing back with overwhelming numbers. California Highway Patrol officers making hundreds of arrests.
We're not going to back down. We have to be forced.
Students demanding divestment from Israel, but also taking their protests beyond the war in Gaza, calling for defunding the police as well, and asking supporters to bring them supplies, including material for shields, umbrellas, and water. Today, the campus left covered in trash and busted tents. The university's iconic Royce Hall defaced with graffiti. Some of those arrested, now released from a downtown jail, speaking out.
How do I feel? I've never felt more proud of myself or my community.
Across the country at Columbia University in New York, the NYPD today releasing portions of body cam video from Tuesday night's raid to clear Hamilton Hall. Police finding protesters sitting on the ground with arms linked. Nationwide, more than 2,100 arrests have been made connected with campus protests. Today, Portland State University campus closed down as police made 12 arrests and cleared the school's library. Overnight, 4 arrested at Yale, 90 removed from campus at Dartmouth. And at the University of Wisconsin's Madison campus, defiant students reestablishing their tents just 24 hours after police disbanded the encampment there.
We're going to be here indefinitely until they meet our demands.
Back at UCLA, cleanup is underway. Professor Graham Blair, who was arrested this morning in the encampment, is defending the students' right to protest, despite some of the tactics they've used.
I think anyone who is worried about graffiti on buildings on a college campus needs to come visit a college campus. It's 18-year-olds who are learning for the first time how to express themselves.
Liz, what is UCLA saying about what played out there this morning?
Well, Lester, the UCLA chancellor says that protesters were given several warnings to leave, but that ultimately the encampment here was unlawful and had become a huge disruption here on campus. They said because of that, it had to be removed to restore campus safety. Lester?
Much different scene behind you, Liz. Thank you. All this is having an impact on the 2024 presidential campaign. President Biden facing pressure over the ongoing protests as former President Trump praised the NYPD campus crackdown. Gabe Gutierrez is at the White House.
President Biden's condemnation of violent campus protests are his first on-camera comments about the growing controversy in more than a week.
There's the right to protest, but not the right to cause chaos.
The president says he won't call in the National Guard, and he bluntly rejected the protesters' demands to change his policy in the Middle East.
Mr. President, have the protests forced you to reconsider any of the policies with regard to the region?
No. President Biden is facing mounting political pressure. Some Democrats wanted to do more to support Palestinians, while many Republicans are blasting him for not speaking out earlier.
In moments like this, there are always those who rush in to score political points. But this isn't a moment for politics. It's a moment for clarity.
Still, the war is playing a larger role in the 2024 campaign. For months on the trail, the president's faced growing pro-Palestinian protests. But the tensions are boiling over this week.
These are radical left lunatics. They got to be stopped now because it's going to go on and on.
Former President Trump is praising the police response at Columbia University.
It was a beautiful thing to watch. New York's finest.
But Mr. Trump is also drawing controversy for an interview where he would not commit to respecting the outcome of the election, saying if everything's honest, I'll gladly accept the results. If it's not, you have to fight for the right of the country. The president firing back late today.
Mr. President, are you worried that Trump says he won't accept the election results?
And Dave, we can circle back to the protests for a moment. The president's remarks, I understand, were a last-minute add to his schedule.
Yes, Lester, but the White House insists the president was not bowing to political pressure. Biden campaign officials, meanwhile, previously downplayed the college protests, arguing that young people care more about other issues, like the economy and abortion rights. Lester?
Okay, Gabe Gutierrez, thank you. A traffic nightmare in the Northeast after a fiery crash in Connecticut shut down part of Interstate 95 in both directions. Emily Aketa is there.
With thick plumes of smoke darkening the sky. A nightmarish scene today in Norwalk, Connecticut.
I feel the heat from here.
After a crash involving a passenger car, tractor trailer, and fuel truck ignited this massive fire on I-95. Flames fully engulfing the tanker that officials say was carrying 8,500 gallons of gasoline.
I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked surreal.
Remarkably, no one was seriously injured, but tonight, officials are urging people to avoid the area as the aftermath, coated in fire-suppressing foam, continues to clog traffic.
Can't stay home, take the train.
This critical Northeast corridor sees 160,000 drivers a day, now being diverted onto local roads and other interstates.
Hour 40 minutes to get to work today. Start.
A section of I-95 will remain closed for several days in order for this bridge, scorched by the flames, to be demolished. Gasoline-fueled fires can get hot enough to deform even steel, leading to bridge collapses like this in Philadelphia last year. Back in the tri-state tonight, drivers bracing for this travel headache to linger. The now charred bridge, less than 10 years old, will begin to be removed first thing tomorrow. Then crews will have to repave the road with the goal of reopening this major traffic artery at the earliest Monday morning. Lester?
Emily Aketa, thank you. We're watching severe flooding tonight in Texas with the Houston area hit hard after more than 5 inches of rain. Cars and trucks were submerged. Some mandatory evacuations were ordered and at least 9 rescues were carried out. Tonight, 6 million people remain under flood watches in parts of Texas and Louisiana. Dramatic moments at the former President Trump's hush money trial today as a key prosecution witness was cross-examined about the alleged payments he helped arrange. Laura Jarrett has the latest.
Former President Trump arriving at court today, watching his defense team go on offense, casting a key prosecution witness as out to extort him for money. The defense hoping to discredit Keith Davidson, the lawyer who negotiated payoffs for Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Both threatened to go public with stories of sex with Mr. Trump ahead of the 2016 election. Mr. Trump has denied the allegations of both women and denied any advance knowledge of the payoffs. His defense team suggesting today Davidson had a habit of shaking down celebrities like Charlie Sheen for money. Davidson saying he never extorted anyone, testifying at length about his negotiations with Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's former attorney, but admitting today he never met nor spoke to the former president. Instead, he dealt exclusively with Cohen, who he painted as desperate and despondent that then President-elect Trump would not make him Attorney General or White House Chief of Staff, describing a phone call where Cohen lamented, "I can't believe I'm not going to Washington." Cohen saying he'd saved Trump so many times, you don't even know. Davidson testifying about Cohen, "I thought he was going to kill himself." A helpful point for the defense as it tries to cast Cohen as having an axe to grind against Mr. Trump. The former president is accused of illegally doctoring his internal records to disguise his repayments to Cohen, making Cohen's testimony critical for prosecutors, who are now seeking additional fines against Mr. Trump, saying he violated a gag order again by calling his former fixer a liar, while the defense argues the former president should be allowed to defend himself against Cohen's frequent criticism.
I'm unconstitutionally gagged. He gagged me, so I'm not even supposed to be, I would say, talking to you because he gagged me.
The judge hasn't yet ruled, but expressed concern about Mr. Trump's statements and the effect they might have on other potential witnesses. Lester?
Laura Jarrett here in New York tonight. Thanks. We'll turn to the developing news out of Los Angeles involving Britney Spears and a late-night incident with her boyfriend at a famed hotel. Chloe Melas is here. Chloe, what do we know?
Lester, NBC News has learned that authorities responded to an incident involving Britney Spears at the landmark Chateau Marmont Hotel early this morning. Now, two sources close to the singer say that she got into a fight with her boyfriend Paul Solis, but went home with her security team and is safe. The sources disputed a report that Spears threatened hotel employees, but did say that she was screaming and crying. Now, late today, Spears took to social media acknowledging an incident had happened, saying that she twisted her ankle and that paramedics showed up at my door illegally. This comes just hours after Spears and her ex Sam Asghari settled the terms of their divorce and 2.5 years after she was publicly released from her 13-year conservatorship. Now, Spears' representatives and the LAFD, they have not responded to requests for comment tonight, Lester.
All right, Chloe, thanks very much. In 60 seconds, what's behind a surge in opioid overdoses with at least 9 people dead since Monday in one city alone? We're with first responders stunned by what they're seeing. In Texas, first responders are racing to contain a surge in opioid overdoses. Calls for help spiking 1,000% this week. Priscilla Thompson is on the front line. We have 2 overdoses running right now.
Wow, right now.
We go out to every overdose.
For Austin EMT Randy Chabra, it's been a harrowing week.
In a typical day, how many overdoses do you all usually get called for?
3, maybe 5.
What does that number look like this week?
We've had, I think, we're up to 73 across the 3 days.
A more than 1,000% spike in overdose calls, likely caused by drugs laced with fentanyl, unbeknownst to users, Austin officials say, confirming at least 9 people have died of suspected overdoses since Monday, amid a flood of hospitalizations and 911 calls.
This morning, it's been like 15 people that's been, I guess they smoked something that was bad.
People in the car, I can't get into the front seat, the mother's passed out.
Do you need a Narcan kit?
Paramedics protectively handing out more than 400 doses of Narcan in just 48 hours, which can reverse an overdose before it's too late. The DEA says fentanyl is now the leading cause of death for young Americans.
My girl, baby, she died. She died of an overdose.
Oh no.
That fentanyl.
Those on the front lines in Austin worry outbreaks like this could be the next wave of the crisis.
My fear is that's just the start. That what's next?
The fear that it becomes just unmanageable.
Right. The fear that we have no ambulances left and that we still have overdoses occurring. It's happened on Monday where you go and it's not one person, it's 4 people. Right? What happens if it's 10 people?
Priscilla Thompson, NBC News, Austin.
We will take a break, and then coming up, alerting drivers when someone is going the wrong way. How it works next. We're back now with a possible way to prevent the deaths of hundreds on the road. Technology that could detect drivers going the wrong way and alert others to the danger. Scott Friedman of our Dallas station on how it works.
Along a turnpike near Dallas, a car makes a U-turn, re-entering going the wrong way. The highway is one of a growing number of U.S. roads with directional sensors, detecting the car, alerting police.
We have a wrong-way driver in your city. We're just tracking him on camera right now.
But authorities are unable to stop the driver, who travels 8 minutes before slamming head-on into another car, killing the wrong-way driver, who investigators say had a blood alcohol level twice the legal limit, and the other driver, 41-year-old Michael James Jackson, on his way home to his wife Wendy.
He was just a kind soul, and he was just so undeserving of this.
There's a car driving the wrong way.
Wrong-way crashes kill about 400 people each year in the U.S., despite an increase in road sensors and highway message boards that can warn of wrong-way drivers. The trouble is alerting people in the path of danger, not just police.
Everyone knew except for the people that were driving the right way and were in imminent danger.
And that's what you want to change.
Absolutely.
Her husband's friends who used to work with Michael and are now spread across some of the nation's biggest tech companies believe cell phone alerts are the answer.
We need to make the people that are in harm's way aware so that they can take action.
Michael Linneman points out state officials can already send alerts through a federal cell phone warning system used for Amber Alerts. He says alerts could be tailored to reach only phones moving near a wrong-way vehicle. It's a concept proving possible, as we saw in Detroit, where German technology company Bosch showed us a cloud-based wrong-way driver warning system test vehicle.
We obviously can't drive the wrong way, so for this test, Bosch engineers have briefly flipped the direction in the detection system just on this freeway ramp up ahead. So when we enter going the right way, we should get a wrong-way alert.
Halfway down the ramp,
check your travel direction. If you're in wrong way, stop at the nearest shelter.
We got the alert, still with plenty of time to pull off the road.
It can also warn other cars and cell phones with apps using the Bosch software nearby. In Europe, Bosch says it issued more than 600 alerts in 1 year. The company now trying to make the system more widely available.
We are working with many partners to bring this feature into their apps, and we're in active discussions with car makers.
Meanwhile, Jackson's friends are hunting for state highway systems, willing to do more with their sensors and cameras to move beyond message boards on the road and send alerts directly to drivers in harm's way.
The technology is there. It's just getting the authorization and getting the right people in place who can allow us to do this.
Her hope that car makers and states find the funding and the will to implement technology that can save lives. Scott Friedman, NBC News, Dallas.
Coming up after a short break, he builds masterpieces piece by piece. Next, how 100,000 Lego bricks really add up. Finally, the artists recreating landmarks one Lego at a time. Here's Hallie Jackson.
For Richard Paulus, it's the little things, the really little things.
So this is my Lego studio.
The longtime Lego lover building a business brick by brick.
When you first started out, was it just for your own pleasure at first?
Just for the challenge of it, if you can look at something and say, oh, how can you possibly build that out of Legos? Challenge accepted.
His inspiration? His city. Replicas of the Capitol, the Kennedy Center, the White House, even the famous Ben's Chili Bowl inside Reagan National Airport.
A little napkin holder to the soda machine, even a little hot dog.
The tools of his trade tucked into bins lining his basement.
Oh, here.
All of these matched by color, totally coordinated.
By his estimate, nearly 100,000 Lego pieces in all. But what you won't find, any kits or directions. Paulus builds as he goes, like he did for his first big sale.
I've always loved Dulles Airport.
You have? 6 months and 70,000 bricks later, the airport itself offered him $10,000 if Paulus could move it.
I actually had to tilt on about a 30-degree angle to get out of here, and then I had to actually saw the railings off of my stairwell to get it out.
It's a business. It's also a passion for you.
It really is.
With more commissions coming in, each click a connection.
When you miniaturize everything, when you scale it down, it makes it more human, more personal.
Personal for everyone.
I can't let you leave empty-handed.
Thank you.
Even us.
So just something I whipped up for you.
Hallie Jackson, NBC News, Washington.
I like his style, and he's building a following, too. That's Nightly News for this Thursday. Thank you for watching. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night. Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or...
Today, 3 people arrested as the search continues for 2 Perth brothers missing in Mexico. The Prime Minister criticises a decision that allowed a former immigration detainee to be in the community without an ankle monitor.
No one should be subject to that sort of violence. It is an outrage that this occurred.
US President Joe Biden condemns violence at pro-Palestinian camps on university campuses, saying order must prevail. And a wild orangutan observed applying a plant with known medicinal properties to a wound. Hello and welcome to Mornings. I'm Catherine Robinson, taking a look at the weather in the capital cities. Brisbane a shower or 2, reaching 24 degrees. Sydney showers and 20. Cloudy in Canberra. Melbourne and Hobart, partly cloudy. Sunny and 22 in Adelaide. Perth a morning shower or 2. And Darwin mostly sunny with a top of 35 degrees. Well, police in Mexico have arrested 3 people as they investigate the disappearance of missing Australian brothers Jake and Callum Robinson. The brothers and an American man were on a surfing trip in northwest Mexico. Reporter Emily Gramenz has the latest from Washington.
Today we have had an update from the local authorities in Baja California, specifically in this region of Ensenada. It's just south of Tijuana, the border town between Mexico and California, and it's where these 2 Australian brothers, Callum and Jack Robinson, and their travelling companion, an American man called Jack Carter Road, were on their surfing holiday. Now, they were last heard from when they were camping near a lighthouse, but then failed to arrive at their next destination where they had accommodation booked, and that was what caused their families to raise the alarm. We had heard yesterday that local police, as they were investigating these 3 men's disappearance, had found one of their phones in the possession of a woman who's believed to be 23 years old. Police said that she'd been found with one of the men's phones. She'd turned it on about an hour away from their last known location, and they also said that she had been found in the possession of some illegal drugs as well. And then today we've heard the update that they have now taken 2 more people into custody. These 2 men are brothers, and police say that one of them is a partner of the woman that they had arrested earlier. In the meantime, local authorities are continuing to carry out what they've called surveillance tours of the local area as they try and find these 3 missing surfers.
Emily Gramenz there. Well, the Prime Minister has criticised a government-appointed panel that didn't require a former immigration detainee to wear an ankle monitoring bracelet. Police allege the 43-year-old man was involved in a home invasion in Perth last month where an elderly couple was assaulted. He's just one of about 150 people released from immigration detention after the High Court ruled indefinite detention for people with no reasonable prospect of deportation was unlawful. It's led to further discussions about how closely people in that cohort are being monitored. Political reporter Stephanie Boris has the latest.
We've hardly heard from the Immigration Minister or the Home Affairs Minister, and they're both responsible for the handling of these former immigration detainees that were released from detention following that High Court decision. The reason that we want to hear from them is because police in Western Australia allege that one of the men involved in quite a brutal home invasion is a former detainee. He's a 43-year-old man. And the comments that those 2 ministers have provided have been pretty vague. Those questions asked of them are around community safety, because the government has always insisted that community safety is paramount, that this cohort would be monitored, that many of them would be wearing ankle monitoring bracelets. But as a result of this crime, we've found out, Kath, that this particular man man was not wearing an ankle monitoring bracelet. Now, that decision is up to a board known as the Community Protection Board. It was devised and chosen, the members of this board, by the federal government saying it was up to this board to make the decision. So it's essentially a way of the government distancing itself from specific decisions. But you've got to remember and keep in mind that this board was set up by the government. And for the first time today, we have heard the Prime Minister actually criticise the decision made, the fact that this man didn't wear an ankle monitoring bracelet. Also this morning, some of his other senior government ministers making similar comments.
I think that's a wrong decision by that board, but they make their decisions independent.
Politicians aren't the experts, so we set up a community protection board. They made a decision to not put an ankle bracelet on this fellow because previously he hadn't shown any crimes of violence. But again, I agree with probably what most viewers would think, that it was a mistake, but you know, it's happened, and I just feel for the family.
Stephanie, the Prime Minister has also reflected on a bail decision made in a West Australian court.
Yeah, so what we have also learned since this alleged home invasion occurred was the 43-year-old man earlier this year being accused of breaching various curfew rules, because most of these former detainees have been, given different rules about maybe what time they have to be home by or how often they have to report to police about their whereabouts. So as a result, he appeared before the court. The Commonwealth prosecutor over there didn't oppose bail, and the Prime Minister this morning weighing into that as well, saying, well, it's up to the courts and the judicial system to decide. He, in this case, the Prime Minister, didn't agree with the decision there either. So some very strong comments coming from the Prime Minister this morning.
And finally, Stephanie, turning now to what's been the focus for politicians this week at both at Commonwealth and state levels, domestic violence. What can you tell us about the meeting that's happening today?
So here in Canberra, state police ministers as well as the commissioners are meeting with the Federal Attorney General, and this meeting, Kath, was always set to occur. It wasn't set up as a result of the Bondi attack or the recent murders of women. These are regular meetings that do occur, but obviously the timing couldn't be better. So the police ministers and commissioners today will be looking at what more can be done to protect women and reduce domestic violence in Australia. But don't expect any major announcements or changes today as such. It's more a broader discussion.
Okay, Stephanie Boris, many thanks. AFL players, coaches and umpires have observed a minute's silence ahead of last night's game to honour the victims of violence against women.
Please pause for a moment as we pay our respects and join the silent tribute to those women who have lost their lives.
The league announced all 18 clubs would join together in a show of unity before matches this weekend. The AFL is also partnering with campaign group Our Watch to deliver training on gendered violence to each club. Inclusion lead Tanya Hosh says everyone has a role to play in driving cultural change.
Well, of course, it does start with that disrespect and that lack of respect for women that has been, entrenched in a lot of people's thinking over time. One of the wonderful things for us working with Our Watch is that we know that their work is evidence-based, and it has been directly designed to work with playing groups. And this same training will be offered to all the women's teams as well when they come back to playing this year. And the feedback that we're getting from the players who've gone through the training already is that it is of practical assistance, and it's allowing them to have conversations about some of the complexities and dynamics that they see and experience, and how they can be the right sort of role model in relation to understanding that there can be a disastrous link between disrespect of women and girls that can lead to the disastrous consequences we're seeing around Australia right now.
Tanya Hosh there. A clean-up is underway at the UCLA campus in California after police removed a pro-Palestinian protest encampment. Hundreds of officers in riot gear reportedly arrested over 100 students as they dismantled the camp that was attacked the previous night by pro-Israeli supporters. US President Joe Biden has broken his silence on the demonstrations, saying people have the right to have their voices heard but not cause chaos.
After midnight, the first signs police had begun to execute their operation. Despite building a makeshift fortress around them, the protesters' barricades were overpowered.
We're seeing police now going into one side of the encampment, and it looks like they're starting to tear heads down. But there's something of a siege mentality here right now, because the protesters and their supporters have gathered around this whole encampment on all sides. If there's no pepper spray, they will be in a capsule.
It became clear the encampment was unlikely to last the night. Hundreds of police formed a ring of steel, while others systematically took ground.
A large number of officers are gradually making their way further in, and they're setting off a volley of flashbangs here to disrupt the crowd as they do it.
The deafening police grenades continued for several hours. Officers were seen firing rubber bullets. Images online appeared to show one person wounded after being shot in the head. Just before dawn, the raid was almost complete.
In a matter of hours, police have now dismantled and flattened much of this encampment, and the last remaining protesters are now being detained and taken away.
President Biden said students have a right to protest, but not to break the law. Activists not affiliated with UCLA have been involved.
We're taking you now live to Sydney, where the New South Wales ministers are speaking following a cabinet meeting.
Today, of course, as people know, we had an emergency special cabinet meeting to hear from, to draw from the expertise, the lived experience of several people, including experience from Victoria and their Royal Commission, about what the New South Wales government can and should be doing immediately and into the future to end the scourge of domestic, family and sexual violence in our state. This is something that is on the minds of each and every woman, I would argue, in New South Wales right now. What are state, territory and national governments going to do about that? Today was about hearing from those experts and those involved in arguing for change for decades, including Rosie Batty, who Australians will know as someone who has driven the national conversation about the need to do better for women and children throughout our country. Out of today, we have clearly heard three very clear things.
that we need to invest very clearly in crisis responses and frontline services for women who are fleeing domestic and family violence, who are fleeing violent homes, violent partners, violent relationships. But that we need to do better in primary protection.
This is Asia First.
Good Friday morning. I'm Julie Yu at 9 a.m. here in Singapore. The headlines this hour. U.S. President Joe Biden breaks his silence on the pro-Palestinian protests that have swept college campuses.
Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not peaceful protest. It's against the law.
The U.S. leader is walking a tightrope in an election year, drawing a line between what he describes as unleashing violence and the right to dissent. He's dismissing the calls for the National Guard to intervene, even as a wave of unrest continues to ripple across America's universities. More than 2,000 arrested in the last fortnight. And Hamas says it will send a negotiating team to Cairo as soon as possible to work on ceasefire talks, despite sticking points in Israel's truce plan. U.S. diplomat Antony Blinken asked the group to consider the proposal as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu threatens to send in ground troops to Rafah.
I'm Arnold Gay. Scores of tourists evacuated following a rescue operation in one of Africa's greatest wildlife reserves, the Masai Mara. Heavy rains have been lashing the country for days now, leading to catastrophic floods. The death toll now at more than 180. In China, officials are urging stronger disaster prevention measures in the southern province of Guangdong, which has also been battered by heavy downpours. Severe weather forecast in more parts of the country through the weekend as millions travel during the May Day break.
I'm Elizabeth Neal with your business news. Apple unveils a record $110 billion buyback program, the largest in the company's history, as the tech giant discloses earnings at top street estimates. But its core iPhone business suffers a decline as sales drop in China amid stiff competition from new smartphone rivals. Plus, the yen gains ground following a second round of suspected currency intervention. We look into the latest campaign to stabilize the Japanese currency. But first, U.S. President Joe Biden has broken his silence over the spreading wave of college protests against Israel's involvement in the Gaza war.
He defended the right to free speech and to protest, but warned there is no right to chaos. It was his first comment in more than a week and follows a massive police operation at UCLA in California.
Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest.
Protesters would argue police were not peaceful too. Firing flashbangs and rubber bullets, officers broke through a makeshift fortress at UCLA, facing fierce pushback from protesters. But the resistance soon gave way as police surged forward and demonstrators tried to flee. A week-long encampment was dismantled in mere hours.
More than 200 people were arrested, tipping the national tally further over 2,000 as police also intervened in New York, New Hampshire, and Portland. Protesters are demanding that universities cut investments to Israel.
I'm a student here. I'm an English major. Please don't fail us. Don't fail us.
Even as the UCLA attempts to clear the remnants of the protest, tensions linger. Remaining pro-Palestinian supporters attempted to face off against police who are still in riot gear.
If these university protests continue. Roger Maynard, CNA, Sydney.
As the Gaza war nears the 7-month mark, all eyes are on Egypt's capital, Cairo, where ceasefire efforts appear to have gathered pace. Hamas says it's sending a delegation there for talks. Its chief affirming that it's studying the truce proposal in, quote, positive spirit. The U.S. has continued to push for the Palestinian group to accept the deal.
We believe it's now incumbent upon them to take the deal. The deal that they demanded, that has been offered, they should accept and move forward. It is Hamas that is the only barrier to a ceasefire right now, an immediate ceasefire, and we are waiting their response.
Well, so far, the talks have stumbled on one key issue, and that is Hamas's demand for a commitment to end the war, while Israel is insisting on eventually resuming it to dismantle the Palestinian group. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeated his vow to launch an offensive in Rafah, which he says is Hamas's last stronghold in the Strip.
And as ceasefire talks continue, the United Nations is looking ahead to the daunting task of rebuilding Gaza. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. Now, the United Nations estimates that rebuilding homes in the devastated Strip would take at least 16 years. It costs $40 billion, and that's most optimistic scenario. Now, the agency says that's because an estimated 72% of all housing in Gaza has been destroyed. The United Nations, a development program, is on a drive to raise post-war funds. But beyond the physical, the agency says the conflict has also dealt a heavy blow to the territory's health, education, and wealth, wiping out 44 years of development. And all those figures I mentioned have nowhere to go but up, because expectations of a breakthrough between Israel and Hamas are not likely at this point. Experts say the conflict could continue to rage on for many more months to come.
Also ahead, Apple delivers relief to investors after reporting market-beating results and forecasting the iPhone maker's return to sales growth in the current quarter. We'll break down Apple's financials next. Plus, we are watching the yen as more signs emerge that Japan likely conducted its second currency intervention this week.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Goodman. Have a good life.